I like guns. That's a difficult admission, as if confessing to some kind of perversion, though it ought not to be.
A.J. Somerset is a Canadian journalist and former Army reservist. He's also an avid hunter and gun collector.
People like all kinds of things: cars, sailboats, acoustic guitars. And nobody has to justify liking these things, as I am continually asked to justify liking guns. My reason is simple. Shooting is fun.
A.J. Somerset's book is called Arms: The Culture and Credo of the Gun.
People are likely to think you're weird for liking guns, which is why it's a difficult admission. In their eyes, you become one of those gun nuts. And although I like guns, I do not like gun nuts.
Later in the conversation, we'll be joined by two other thinkers who will help expand and deepen the discussion. But first, my interview with A.J. Somerset. You say in the book, and I quote, "I do not like gun nuts." When did that realization actually first hit you?
Well, this was when I first returned to shooting. I guess it was 5 years ago. And I just noticed this utterly self-centered attitude that a lot of people had, that I should be allowed to do anything I want, own any gun I want, and if other people get killed by other people, well, that's other people's problem, which I think is insane.
Now, when did you first shoot a gun then?
I think I was 12 years old. I was in Boy Scouts at the time, 22 rifle.
As part of your Boy Scout experience, you were shooting guns, or?
Yes, and we were shooting in the basement of a high school where there was a rifle range.
Where was this?
In London, Ontario. There's Sir Frederick Banting Secondary School had at that time a rifle range in the basement. And it's a 22 caliber rifle, so there's not a lot of recoil or anything like that. It's pretty innocuous. It was fun.
Okay, then years later, how many years later before you picked up a gun and shot it again?
Well, I was when I was in the military, I had both the stuff I had to shoot as part of my job.
In fact, you tell an anecdote really at the beginning of the book about your training in military shooting. You were pretty good. I mean, you were shockingly good.
Well, I was surprisingly good that one time. I shot.
What happened?
Well, I think that that one time, the first group I ever shot in the Army was fantastic. And after that, my shooting with the FN deteriorated.
Your shooting
rapidly.
was so fantastic. You hit the same tiny little spot in a target at, 100 yards? Or what was the distance?
It was 100 yards, and the first two rounds were maybe separated by half an inch. And then the other one was just a couple inches away. So that was pretty good for the first time with the FN.
Okay, obviously there was some sort of tipping point where you came to look at guns in a different way. And I understand that Justin Bourque might have had something to do with that.
Well, Justin Bourque would have been after the tipping point. I think when I was still in the military, I suppose I probably would have been prone to rather gun nut views. It never really sort of came up. But then I left and I spent about 15 years not shooting. And I was, still exposed to people who hunted and stuff like that because I was writing for outdoor magazines. But it just seems self-evident to me that we're in a democracy, and that means that you have to strike a balance. Some people don't like something. Some people do like something. You have to come to a consensus. You can't just throw your blinkers on and say, I'm going to do my thing, and nobody should be allowed to stop me.
Tonight, a manhunt is underway in Moncton for a man armed with guns.
There's been perhaps the darkest day in the history of the RCMP in New Brunswick.
Oh my goodness!
He shot him.
He shot him!
Wide one.
Oh my God, call 911!
An armed suspect is still on the loose in Moncton. 3 RCMP officers are dead, 2 more are wounded.
I think that Justin Bourque, not only for me, but for Canadians at large, helped to show us just how nuts the gun lobby has become in this country. Because the National Firearms Association, while Bourque was still strolling through the streets, police hadn't caught him yet, they were already issuing a press release that said, Justin Bourque has just demonstrated gun control doesn't work, therefore we shouldn't have it. Which, I think everybody who was sane in Canada immediately realized that is, or recognized that is just nuts. But that's what the National Firearms Association came out and said. So I think it really illustrated just how different the thinking is.
And that's a specific incident, but this is a book. You've written a complete book about the nuttiness of gun culture. How would you characterize it more broadly?
More broadly, it's almost an aggressively childish worldview in which the only person that matters is me and what I want to do. So if what I want to do causes anybody any harm, or my being allowed to do what I want to do causes anybody any harm, that's not my problem. I'm not the one doing the harm. Therefore, I should be allowed to continue doing what I'm doing. And then you punish people who are, breaking the laws. But in the real world, people realize that if I'm allowed to buy a gun, then the other guy's allowed to buy a gun without any regulations. So you then have no control over anything. And if the gun lobby had its way, and in Canada, we did away with the Firearms Act, we did away with all registration, we did away with all forms of licensing, and we said you can buy anything. Well, then, anybody who wants to, including people with violent criminal records, can now buy anything. So I don't even understand what kind of worldview can come up with that except to say that it's aggressively childish.